Now, I'm going to ask for your forgiveness if you don't have a dog at this point, because if you've never had a dog and you don't know what having a dog is all about, you will probably never quite understand what we are about to discuss. But Neil Oliver, who is a great historian, fantastic TV presenter of Coast, brilliant archaeologist and great thinker, wrote an amazing piece at the weekend about how wonderful dogs basically are. And the headline was, "Amazing Gracie has made a wretch like me barking mad for dogs." Now, apart from the fact that that's all a bit cliched, that's not his fault. That was the Sunday Times that put that headline on it. Dogs have actually kept an awful lot of people sane, I think, in this particular lockdown. Neil, a very good morning to you. Welcome back.
Good morning, Mike. Thanks for having me.
Not at all. I never know what you're going to write about at the weekend. I don't know how you or when you decide what you are going to write about, but it was a very pleasant sort of side show, I suppose, from COVID and from the lockdown and from all the madness of crowds and the people shouting at one another and arguing on Twitter, for you just to write this very loving piece about your dog and what your dog has done for you.
I do often, I quite often write about my dog because, as you said, if you don't own a dog, if you've never owned a dog, the depth of emotion might escape you, understandably. But I've learned so much from being a companion to a dog. I don't even consider that I own her anymore. Right. If there's any owner, people think it cuts the other way. But in this lockdown situation, we're, amongst many other things, we're being denied the opportunity to see ourselves reflected in each other's eyes. And I think a lot of the understanding, the valuable understanding that we get about ourselves is reflected back at us. You can think your own thoughts and you can come to conclusions, but it's when you test those ideas out on others that you see the right and wrongness of them reflected back at you. And we're missing out on normal discourse. And the much beloved Scots poet Robert Burns, said, "Would some power the gift to gaze to see ourselves as others see us," which is to say, if only God had given us the ability to see ourselves through others' eyes. And I think quite simply, when you own a dog, you do get that. You get the judgment of another living creature, not even our own species. And when times are hard, as they are at the moment, there's something profoundly comforting, I think, about seeing the reassurance of in the eyes of a beloved pet, because our pets, our dogs, require from us the very basic things of life. They want shelter, they want food, and they want love, the love of the pack. And no matter what's going on in your own life, if you have a dog, you have to rise above your own problems and deal with what that other species needs. And through lockdown, apart from anything else, we have had as a family, we've had to go out every day for a walk for an hour because Gracie needs it and is deserving of that. And she has given us a structure to our days that we might not otherwise have had. And if you feel as if the world is ganging up on you sometimes, or if you feel out of step with the current opinion that's out in the world, you come back in and you look in your dog's eyes, and your dog just looks at you and reflects back at you what it sees in you. And to be valued, trusted and respected and needed by a dog is just balm for the soul in troubled times.
It is. And you make the point, Gracie is your dog's name, Wolfhound. The world has basically remained what it always was, which I find interesting as well, because for those of us who think that we've gone through this kind of terrible change, that the world has altered and has kind of reappeared in an unrecognisable form, where you're walking around with masks on, you're walking around distancing yourself from other people, you're no longer hugging people, you're not kissing people, for a dog, as you point out, nothing's actually changed.
I'm nodding along with every word you're saying. Our world is so complicated, with or without the virus and some of the things that are going on at the moment. We've made for ourselves such a complicated world. But a dog reminds you of what is essential to life. As I mentioned before, shelter and food and love, the love of the pack, the love of the family. If you take away, if you put someone in a state of pain, be it emotional or physical, or if you take away food or shelter from them, their appetite for smartphones and social media and fast cars goes out of the window pretty quick.
Yeah.
Because suddenly it's all about the basics. And in a fundamental sense, a dog never gets away from those basics. And if you have the companionship of a dog, you're constantly reminded of the essential, important elements of a happy life. Happiness is not being in physical or emotional pain. It's having enough food to eat, it's having shelter, and it's being surrounded, if possible, by those who love you and love you for who you are. And you get that from a dog. You get it from people, of course you do. But there's something, we, as a species, biologists debate to this day how long ago we became connected to dogs. Some say it's 30 or 40,000 years ago that relationship was formed, or it may be as recently as maybe in the last 10 to 15,000. But in any event, how miraculous is it that two different species saw in one another reasons to come together? And we call it domestication, which it is. You know, all dogs are descended from the European grey wolf. Every species of dog, you know, there's hardly any variation between them, but they're essentially all the same breed, in the same way that we are all the same breed of dog as human beings. And I find it very important that all the domestications that happened of the animals, horses, sheep, cattle, it all happened long ago, and there's no more domestication to come. Those special relationships with certain animals, it all happened long ago, and certainly the first of them was with the dog. And we must be able to see something important in the fact that two species, so very, very different in obvious ways, saw that their lives would be better if they were shared. And that, I think, says something important about what it is to be alive.
And I think, as you say, what it is to realise that actually the more that the world seems to change around us, the less we should be concerned about that, and the more we should regard the important things of life as staying the same. I mean, Ricky Gervais, who's a great dog lover, great animal lover, in his new show Afterlife, talks about, you know, he's terribly depressed, his wife dies of cancer, but the reason he doesn't kill himself is because he has to feed the dog. You know, and it's kind of that simple. And he's like, he realises that the dog relies upon him, so he can't kill himself.
It sounds well. You know, obviously Ricky Gervais has made it the subject of has made it part of a comedy, and it sounds like a joke. But you know, in comedy and humour, there is profound truth. And however simple it is, there's no getting away from the importance of that's there in having to look after someone else. And in this case, the someone can be a dog.
Yeah.
And that dog, no matter what stresses and strains and incomprehensions you're going through as a human being in this complicated modern world, your dog needs water, it needs out to go to the toilet, it needs your love, it needs food, and that's it. And essentially, if this is a man, Primo Levi's great work about surviving the concentration camps, during the terrible genocide in Europe in the 20th century, he's at his lowest ebb at one point, quite early on in the story. But he encounters in the foul wash houses that they all get herded into every morning. He encounters somebody that he knew from the world before, a colleague, and this colleague has stripped off and has his clothes neatly folded, held between his knees, and he's going through the motions of washing in cold water in a trough. And Primo Levi says to him, "Why bother? What is the point? Who are you kidding?" And his colleague says, "This is when it matters most, because you must maintain the scaffolding of a dignified life. And your sense of humanity cannot be taken from you. You can only surrender it. It can be beaten out of you, it can be tortured out of you, but ultimately it can only be taken from you. You have to, no, it can't be taken from you. You have to surrender it." And this man was saying, do not surrender your humanity. No matter the chaos and the horror that's around you, choose to maintain your humanity. And I'm doing this by doing the things I would do on a normal day if I wasn't in this hellhole. I would get up, I would go to the bathroom, I would wash myself, and I would put clothes back on, and I would start the day that way. And that maintains my scaffolding. And that scaffolding is all I have left in this hell to keep me upright. And there's some of that essential truth in walking your dog. If you think the world is against you, and if you think there's no hope left, if you are blessed by being able to look across into the dark brown eyes of a dog that simply needs fed or watered or taken out for a walk, then joining with that species, that other creature, in that simple necessity of life gives you back your human dignity. It's that simple.
Yeah.
You find how miraculous that to some extent you can be reminded of human dignity not in the face of another human, but by a positive and loving interaction with a member of another species. That says at least as much about what it means to be human and alive as any interaction that we might have with our fellow human beings.
Yes, because our interaction with our fellow human beings is becoming what I would regard as slightly tricky at times at the moment. I mean, I had a run-in with some people yesterday simply because I was out having lunch in an outside situation out on the street. These people came and sat down next to us and complained that we were making too much noise. And it was like, what's wrong with you? Get over it. When I take my dog out for a walk, I have conversations with him, which, of course, he can't talk back to me, but he kind of can with his eyes, and he kind of looks back. And, I find myself sometimes wandering through the fields around where I live in Sussex, and somebody comes around the corner and you're talking to the dog and you're kind of going, oh, I've been caught out talking to the dog. But they kind of understand it, that it's a very happy place to be.
Don't you get that as well? It also your dog can make bridges between you and other people in ways that might otherwise be absent. We've got a route that we walk every day. Pretty much we go the same walk every day with Gracie. And we meet, sometimes we meet new people, but a lot of the time we meet the same people again and again and again. And in the majority, they are other dog owners. And you do that crazy thing of you can begin a relationship with a fellow human being actually by talking to the dog, first of all. Because, you can say hello to the dog.
Yeah.
And when that other owner realizes that you are simpatico with what it is to be a dog owner, it opens up a whole world of connections between you. And we have now forged friendly, convivial relations with people that we would otherwise never have met, simply because of the shared experience of passing in opposite directions and sharing the companionship of dogs. And it brings us together as people through the medium of another species. I think that says something really deep that can be so easily overlooked because people just you're just a dog owner, but it's actually a profound relationship.
Oh yeah, I mean, we know people by their dogs' names. I mean, there are people that I know who I don't actually know their names, but I know their dog's name, and so that's the people that you meet when you're on the walk with them. You can get,
I think. You can be reminded of the value of human life. I think we're too much in danger of this lack of kindness and this default setting that so many of us are having at the moment towards aggression to the stranger and to the other, and to take up these defensive stances all the time. And I think we're losing a bit of sight of each other as simple, naked apes, just people trying to get by. And making mistakes. Thousands of years ago, supposedly, we learned the value of redemption and the idea of not judging one another lest we be judged. And these are religious or not. These are important lessons to live by. When I was working in Australia a few years ago, and we were telling a story for the documentary Coast Australia about the whalers of a town called Eden, fittingly enough, in southern New South Wales, and the legend was, or the factual story was that the European whalers had been going out in their ships, and when they harpooned a big whale, a humpback, the killer whales would come in and try to eat, and what they wanted was the tongue and the lips of the big whales. And the Europeans' response, first of all, was to harpoon the killer whales and to try and drive them away. But the Aboriginal indigenous Australians said, no, you're making a big mistake there. We've known for thousands of years that the killer whales want to join in the hunt, and they want to cooperate because they've identified you as useful fellow hunters. And if you harpoon, they will bring the big whales in like sheepdogs bring in sheep. You can harpoon them, you lay off, you let the killer whales go in, and all they will take is the tongue and the lips, and then they will withdraw, and you'll be left with the whale carcass, and you can get the oil and the blubber and the bone and whatever else it is that you need. And we call it the law of the tongue. The law of the tongue. And if you adhere to the law of the tongue, you will have a relationship like no other with a fellow hunter. And one family only in Eden, New South Wales, the Grahams, adopted the strategy of the law of the tongue. And they forged this relationship with a pod of killer whales that transcended generations. It was passed from father to son. As the new whales came and the new sons of the family went into the whaling industry, this relationship with the animal continued. And there is something very, very deep and very profoundly educational about realizing that other species with which we share the planet sometimes identify us as useful, as valuable. Because the Aboriginal Australians were at pains to point out that the the relationship was initiated not by people, but by the whales. The whales had watched, the whales had identified fellow hunters and had decided for themselves that a union with those other species on the planet would be mutually beneficial. And they had engineered that relationship. And so we can learn what our values are, what our potentials are as animals reaching out for understanding. We can acquire some of that understanding by looking into the eyes of fellow creatures. There are such lessons to be learned, and a child can learn it from the youngest age by something as simple as having the opportunity to have a relationship with a dog.
Well, it's heartening to hear that there are some species that actually do think we're useful. That is good. Let me ask you about the big story of the morning, which is rapidly becoming, which is the removal of obviously that William Colston statue down in Bristol. You and I have spoken about the whole statue craze earlier in the lockdown. They've replaced it apparently overnight with a local artist's impression of the statue of a woman who was on the Black Lives Matter march. I mean, it's probably getting more coverage than it should get, but it's basically a woman standing with her fist raised as a Black Power sort of signal on the plinth that Edward Colston once stood on. I'm finding it slightly ironic that the people who wanted to tear down a statue of a genuinely important figure in history, regardless of what he did or didn't do, they've now replaced it with somebody who I don't think in years to come will be considered important.
I think we've been talking about the necessity to strip back to simple things that we can understand almost as children. And I think it's another of those situations where we need to remind ourselves of what we learn at our mother's knees about right and wrong and fairness. And I would say that whatever is that's a topic that's become as hot as a crucible in a furnace, really.
Yeah.
You'd be hard pushed for anyone to touch it without burning their fingers. But I would say it has to come down to simple things about, we have long ago decided that we take collective decisions for the collective good, and that we need to go through processes of listening, talking. It's always about talking and listening, hearing different ideas, and making majority decisions as a result of some version of the democratic process. I would say, in just the same way that if there was a time had come where a different figure had to be on that plinth, then the decision to remove it or not ought better to have been taken by the people of Bristol or the people of, I don't know how you work that one out. And likewise, if there's a decision about what else to go on the plinth, then it has to be a decision born of a simple discussion by the people of Bristol about what they want. Maybe they don't want anything on the plinth at all.
Right.
That would be the product of a simple, straightforward conversation. I mean, I was looking for something the other day, and I saw the statue of Justice. There's outside the Old Bailey, I think it is. And I know the figure didn't start out with a blindfold, but in more recent times, the figure of Justice is blindfolded because the idea is that we ought to be judged, if we ought to be judged at all, by a process where we're not judged as ourselves, but we're judged blindly. You know, that justice should be blind. It shouldn't be paying attention to who you are, what colour you are, what religion you are. Justice should be doled out equally to all. And so the blindfold is supposedly there to make justice blind, but there have also, for a long time, almost from the blindfold went up, there have been those who have suggested that it's because sometimes justice turns a blind eye. Mm. Now, I don't know the truth of either, but I definitely don't think it's in the interests of all if we ever get into a situation where, in some circumstances, justice is seen to turn a blind eye. That would definitely be bad, because any system, we have to remember that any system that can't protect the worst of us certainly cannot protect the best of us. You know, and so we need blindfolded justice so that we're not being judged on the basis of our past or our colour or our religion or anything else. Justice has to be blind. And I think there is a way to resolve that white hot, burning situation around that plinth in Bristol, by just going back to simple fundamentals, which is everyone who has a stake in this must be heard, and a decision is taken collectively.
Yeah. I think that's very right and very true. And justice has to be seen to be done as well as being done. And it also has to be done the same for everybody. Neil, once again, thank you very much indeed. We'll talk to you again next week. Neil Oliver there with his take on what's going on this week. And, of course, on what's going on down in Bristol. We'd love to hear from you on that one. A lot of people, of course, you might not be surprised, saying, I find it offensive. I want to tear it down. And, of course, the argument that you can't do that doesn't apply because it's already happened. So you should probably be able to do that without fear or favour.